Former President Donald Trump was indeed indicted for a second time yesterday related to his handling of classified documents after his term in office. Trump's lawyer confirmed he's facing 7 counts, including charges under the Espionage Act, obstruction of justice, destruction or falsification of records, conspiracy, and false statements. The former president shared this video online after news of his indictment. Let's watch.
Very sadly, we're a nation in decline, and yet they go after a popular president, a president that got more votes than any sitting president in the history of our country, by far, and did much better the second time in the election than the first. And they go after him on a boxes hoax, just like the Russia hoax and all of the others. This has been going on for 7 years. They can't stop because it's election interference at the highest level. There's never been anything like what's happened. I'm an innocent man. I'm an innocent person. They had the Mueller hoax, the Mueller report, and that came out. No collusion after 2.5 years. That was set up by Hillary Clinton and Democrats. But this is what they do. This is what they do so well. If they would devote their energies to honesty and integrity, it would be a lot better for our country. They could do a lot better. They could do a lot of great things.
Here to discuss this with us today is the Hill's Rebecca Beich. Welcome, Rebecca. Glad to have you on to break this down.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Good morning.
Good morning. So what do we make of this? Is he comparing apples to oranges here with comparing his indictment with maybe, I don't know, the documents that Pence had, the documents that Hillary had? For me, when I look at this, I think, okay, well, Trump refused to give them back. He tried to hide them. Seems like a different scenario than what he described, saying that this is just, politically motivated. What do you make of his statement there?
Yeah, I mean, this is absolutely not an apples to apples comparison. Just the amount of documents that were found, both with Pence or with Biden compared to the at least 300 classified records that Trump had at Mar-a-Lago would distinguish that just on numbers alone. But of course, when we see these charges, another major distinction here is the obstruction of justice charges. And it's clear from the pattern of the case and what was detailed on the warrant to search the property that they made multiple efforts to recover these documents and were unable to do so. And that's what distinguishes this case in a major way from both Pence and Biden. And, I would note that the Justice Department just decided not to proceed in charging in charging Pence for the documents that were found among his belongings.
Where does the fact that Trump says that he declassified these documents come into play here? Because his argument about the Biden document scandal is that Biden was a senator at the time that he took a lot of these documents and therefore didn't have the capability or the authority to declassify, whereas he did. Is there any evidence to suggest that he did go through the proper declassification process, or is that kind of why the indictment has proceeded?
So one of the things that's important to note here, too, is that for Espionage Act charges, documents themselves don't have to be classified. They just have to be considered what's called national defense information. That's in part because this law was written before the U.S. even had a classification system. But separately from that, I'm sorry, can you repeat the original question?
Sure. I'm just wondering if there's any evidence to suggest that Trump did declassify some of these documents. Him and his administration officials claimed that he basically had a standing order to declassify everything that left the White House. So I'm wondering where that plays into the indictment.
Yeah, that's right. Sorry, let's jump back into that claim. So another thing that's huge on this front is reporting by CNN indicating that Trump, there's a recording of Trump kind of spelling out that he both has classified records and that he would be unable to show it to the people that he's, speaking with during this meeting because it's classified and he didn't declassify it before leaving office. That's another thing that's important for an Espionage Act charge because you have to show that there was, a willful retention. But that admission on tape, which appears to be evidence that the special counsel has in his possession, would indicate that Trump, understood that some of these documents were classified, that he couldn't be showing them to people, couldn't be releasing them. But separately, Trump has claimed that he can just declassify a record just by thinking about it. That's not exactly how this works. Presidents do have broad power to declassify records, but there is a process that results from declassifying a record. So there would, in theory, be some kind of, record keeping around that. But I'd also like to note that while Trump has said that publicly, that's not a claim that his lawyers have specifically made in court filings. They have not backed that up in their own legal arguments in court.
Something I say a lot is that the law and justice are not the same. I find that it's important to make that distinction. Sure, yes, it's legal. There's a technical classification process. It's a legal term to say documents classified, but there's also a reason for that. And there's a process that Trump would have to go through, right? Where he would meet with folks who would explain what are the threats to national security if we were to declassify these documents? And that's why there's a process there to declassify them. Although he does have the power to make documents declassified as the president, him just saying these are declassified now doesn't suffice, and we have this process for a reason. Can you say anything more about the importance of the declassification process?
Yes. So like you pointed out, this isn't something that a president can do after leaving office. It is only something that they can do while they are in fact president. So the timeline of, these documents being moved is kind of key here. But separately from that, a president does have the power to declassify records, but keep in mind that there's a whole cohort of people who have access to this information, but are also responsible for properly storing it. And so when a president does declassify a record, that notice goes out to a bunch of people who then have to reconsider how it's stored, how it's classified, just basically how it's, managed within the government.
What do you make of the Espionage Act being used here? This is a World War I era, law that was basically used against perceived enemies of the state. In terms of the political calculus of this, how does using the Espionage Act in particular play into the perception that this could be a political prosecution?
Well, I think obviously it's very remarkable that he's being charged with that. I mean, to have a former president be charged under the Espionage Act is extraordinary on its own. But I think one thing to keep in mind here is, yes, there is, the espionage component to it. People associate this with spying, but keep in mind that this is a law that governs how, sensitive information must be handled, and kind of putting in writing that you can't distribute it. And so that's the portion of the law that is getting Trump in trouble here, is that you cannot retain and remove these documents from the setting in which they are meant to be kept.
So where we're at now with the former president being indicted for a second time, Republicans have just slammed what they say is Joe Biden's political persecution of his number one 2024 challenger. Here's a video of Missouri Republican Josh Hawley on the matter.
And Laura, here's what I will say. If the president in power can just jail his political opponents, which is what Joe Biden is trying to do tonight, we don't have a republic anymore. We don't have the rule of law. We don't have the Constitution. Our Constitution is built on the basic rule of law and due process, and nobody should be in doubt of what's happening tonight. Joe Biden and his cronies are trying to take out their chief political opponent. This has never happened before in American history, Laura. We are in dangerous, dangerous waters, and it is because of Joe Biden.
And we also have Congressman Byron Donalds, who tweeted, quote, "On the day members of Congress learn from an FBI document linking then Vice President Joe Biden to receiving $5 million from Burisma in a pay-for-play scheme, Biden's DOJ announces another phony indictment of the leading candidate for the GOP presidential nomination. Biden's likely opponent and the former president. This mob-like justice system is turning Lady Justice on its head and is the most significant threat to our democracy. Stand with President Trump." Meanwhile, CNN reports that today President Biden is planning to go about his schedule without wading into the matter of Trump's indictment, a, quote, "intentional demonstration of calm and normalcy amid the continuing chaos of his predecessor." At what point do you think Biden does weigh in on this indictment, if at all?
Yeah, well, so just to go back to the first question, in terms of some of the Republican commentary on this and DOJ and FBI being politicized, I mean, I think we've heard two kind of different lines from Republicans this week. They've also been, actively pursuing a probe into President Biden. And after a briefing with the FBI on that matter this week, they were, basically commending the tip, commending the FBI, stressing the importance of this tip to the FBI. But in this other matter, they've argued it's political. Democrats have completely dismissed that. And I think if you look at the kind of extent of the case here, it's not just pursuing Trump because he had classified records. There's more to these charges. It's about a broader effort to retain the documents and refuse to turn them over.
When I think about Donald Trump's reaction here, not just initially to, okay, we know that you have classified documents and they're at Mar-a-Lago where we have a lot of foreign folks coming in and out, people with power, people we wouldn't probably want to have their hands on sensitive national security information. That's a concern. But also his reaction to the legal process of, hey, we know you have these documents. Typically, in the case of Pence and Clinton, they've said, okay, I'll turn them back over. In the case of Trump, it seems as though he's really tried to hang on to them. He's had people move documents around when he's heard they want to get the documents from him that are at Mar-a-Lago. To me, it seems like this kind of comparison where we can say, all right, yes, Clinton and Pence had documents. That's kind of like taking a candy bar out of a convenience store. With Trump, it's like he took a television and then moreover said, well, this isn't much different than if I had just used a credit card. I pay later anyway. I'm still going to pay for it. It's technically all fine. That's really the comparison I see. And then he's going to go write Truth Social tweets about it and brag about it. In the eyes of the law, it seems to me that most people, when they act that way after committing a crime, typically a judge gives them a harder sentence than when they have remorse and take accountability and say, I'm sorry, I'm going to do the legal process here. How much do you think that is at play with this indictment, how Trump has reacted to our legal process and system of justice?
Well, regardless, it really doesn't matter who, takes or retains documents. That's improper. But the key distinction, again, when we're looking at the fact that Pence and Biden had documents, they actually notified the Justice Department that they found these records. And when you look at the Trump case, it started with archives. They were the one that reached out and said, we believe you have presidential records. It took several months to get them back. An initial 15 boxes turned over included 184 classified records. That's what began the referral to the Justice Department. They repeatedly asked for the records. They were unable to get them. That resulted in a subpoena. The compliance with the subpoena elicited another 38 classified records, but we've learned through court filings since that, Trump's attorney who turned over those 38 documents may have been misled as to the additional records that were on the property. And of course, the resulting search of Mar-a-Lago, authorities found another 103 classified records. And so, it's not just about remorse, it's about cooperating with authorities, and it's also about ensuring that you're complying with the law. And a key distinction for the prosecution on an Espionage Act charge is showing the willful retention. If you've turned over documents once you've been alerted that you have them, you're not willfully retaining them.
Republicans have also alleged that the prosecutor here, Jack Smith, is perhaps politically tainted because of his involvement in the IRS Lois Lerner scandal of targeting conservative nonprofits, as well as his previous donations to Democrats. Will that matter at all as this indictment moves forward?
Those are all issues that Trump's attorneys are free to raise in court. And you were also asking about, is this indictment political? What do we think about them bringing these charges? But at the end of the day, that's what the justice system is kind of designed to weigh these claims, right? There are going to be jurors who evaluate this in terms of the bigger picture of the evidence that the Justice Department has assembled, and they'll determine if they think, a conviction is warranted.
Rebecca Beich, thank you so much for joining us and breaking this down.
Thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate it.